say resident-driven revitalization. So thank you all for spending your Tuesday night with us. I want to welcome you to a big part of our education series. We're also doing another presentation next week that's going to take place on May 18th, same time. And I'll tell you a little bit about that after tonight's presentation. But right now, I want to turn it over to my friend Maddie over at NOLA Ready.
All right. Good evening, y'all. Thank you guys so much for having me. So my name is Maddie. I am a communications Vista on the NOLA Ready team. Anna Nguyen may be joining us a little bit later on, and she's sort of our head of communications and community outreach at NOLA Ready. And the majority of what we do as a team is really just focused on emergency preparedness communications for the city of New Orleans. So a huge part of that is, of course, hurricane preparedness. And today we're just going to go over some basic tips on being ready for a hurricane as we approach the 2021 season. So the number one thing that I recommend is keeping up to date. You can get way more information than I could possibly include in this presentation on ready.nola.gov. And then by following our social media at NOLA Ready. We're on all the basic social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about hurricane season. So the main thing about hurricane season in 2021 that is different from previous seasons is that COVID-19 is obviously a major concern. They're coinciding emergencies right now. And so just keep in mind, and this will be sort of scattered throughout the presentation, that hurricane preparedness also includes COVID preparedness this year. So hurricane season is June 1st through November 30th, although some experts have been saying it's moved up a little bit lately. So we are already in the midst in terms of my team's work. But really for New Orleans, the greatest risk is in August and September. So we've got a little bit of time to get ready. The initial hurricane season outlook for 2021 predicts an above average season. So we're anticipating more storms than average. And the other thing to keep in mind is that it really only takes one big storm to have a major impact. So as native New Orleanians, you guys are probably even more familiar with hurricanes than I am. And really the big thing that we want to stress here is making sure that you and your loved ones are all on the same page about your emergency plans. So we're going to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the science behind this. So basically tropical weather starts with a low pressure area of circling winds over water. And tropical weather can turn into a variety of different levels of storms before it actually hits the coast. So we can get a tropical depression, this is the smallest, a tropical storm or a hurricane. And then hurricanes, as you guys probably know, have categories 1 through 5. So one thing that you might not know is that the way that the National Weather System sort of determines a hurricane's category is based actually only on wind speed. So the higher wind speed, the higher category storm. But as emergency managers, we're really considering a variety of concerns when we're thinking about evacuations and hurricane preparedness. So not only winds, but we think about rain, we think about flooding, we think about sea level rise and surge. So there's all sorts of things to consider that go into our evacuation plans and our preparedness plans. So just because a storm is labeled as like a 1 or a 2 doesn't mean that it's not a big deal. There are quite a few things that you can consider as a homeowner to be prepared for a storm. So in terms of winds, as you can sort of see on the slide here, you can get insurance for wind, make sure that you're maintaining your roof, prune all of your surrounding trees and cut down any dead trees. You want to secure your outdoor furniture, or if a storm is coming, you want to move any furniture inside. And then, of course, in the case of a major storm, you're going to want to cover your windows as well. In terms of tornadoes, the major thing you can do is really just pay attention to watches and warnings. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to get on our alert system in a minute. And then in terms of flooding, you can get flood insurance. You can clear your gutters and downspouts to sort of help with the flow of water. Clear your catch basins. Again, the case of a major storm, you can move property to the highest floor in your house or the highest section of your house, and then you can elevate your home as well. And then finally, in terms of coastal flooding, you just want to pay attention to those warnings and then elevate your home, and then also consider where your utilities lie. So keeping those sort of power cord outlets, all of that type of electrical equipment as high in your house as possible. And then if we go to the next slide. So another thing to consider is flood insurance. I really would recommend pretty much anyone in the city of New Orleans gets flood insurance if you're a homeowner. Most homeowners and renters insurance does not cover flood damage. So this is sort of a separate insurance that you have to invest in. But you can also cover the contents of your house if you're renting. So you can get flood insurance as a renter. And we really recommend it. So in 2016, new flood maps were adopted in New Orleans, which made flood insurance more affordable for many New Orleanians. And flood insurance typically provides more recovery dollars after a major disaster than any other sort of FEMA fund. So in the last 20 years, property owners in New Orleans received 7 times more money from flood insurance payouts than from FEMA payouts. So you'll really see the difference in the dollars that you're getting in the case of a disaster if you get flood insurance. The main thing to sort of emphasize here is that you need to be, as with all insurance, your own advocate. So some mortgage companies dropped flood policies automatically. If you're mapped out of a flood zone when they change, they may not notify you. And then, sometimes insurance agencies may or may not include flood insurance in their homeowners insurance. So it's something you should just call and check up on before you invest. And then in terms of contacting insurance, you can find an agent through the National Flood Insurance Program Referral Call Center. And for more information on that, and then also just to look at your own property's flood risk, you can go to ready.nola.gov/rain, and you can look up your actual address and get an actual sort of percentage in terms of your risk. So then if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about emergency alerts. So there we go. Yep. So in order to receive emergency alerts from NOLA Ready, there are a couple different ways that you can get signed up. I recommend in this day and age to get signed up for our text alerts. So we just changed our system. If you're on it, you've gotten a million updates from us, but if you're not on it, the number has changed. So you want to text NOLA Ready to 77295, and you'll get emergency alerts related to storms. You'll get notified when parking on the neutral ground opens up. Definitely in the case of an evacuation, you'll get alerts. And I just recommend it to keep up to date with what's going on. But then in addition, if you don't, have a smartphone, you can also sign up in other ways. So you can sign up via email and follow us on social media. So just to get all your options, you can check out ready.nola.gov and look at our emergency alert system. And then if you go to the next page, this is really just encouraging you to check in with your neighbors about their evacuation plans and also their vaccination plans as they go sort of hand in hand with emergency preparedness this year. So as a member of the Homeowners Association or its affiliates, really just keeping in mind that your community is at risk together, and planning together can really help you prepare. So then we can go to the next slide. Okay, yeah. So the two sort of things that we talk about in terms of individual preparedness. So regardless of if you're a homeowner, a renter, whatever, if you're a resident in the city of New Orleans, we recommend that you have a go bag and a home kit. And if we go to the next slide, should have, yep, more details on what those are. So your go bag is what you would take in the case of a mandatory evacuation. Depending on the severity of a storm, the city might issue a mandatory evacuation order, in which case you want to have some basic sort of materials ready. So self-care materials, basic hygienic materials, clothes, toiletries, and then of course you want to have identification on you. You want to have cash, and then sort of like a list of emergency contacts in case, again, your cell phone dies because you may not have power. You're going to want your medications and a copy of medical records, as well as your birth and marriage certificates, and then any other sort of important documentation, whether that's proving where you live or your insurance documentation, things like that. And then finally, just don't forget about your pets and any other sort of folks in your family group or friend group that you may be evacuating with, what they need to take care of themselves. So that might include diapers, formula, a variety of things depending on your family group. And then in terms of your home kit, so in the case where there's not enough time to evacuate in a disaster, or the severity of a storm increases as it gets closer, or anyway, any sort of number of scenarios where a storm ends up being pretty bad, but we didn't evacuate or you did not evacuate, you're going to want to have a home kit. And basically a home kit includes what you need to get through 3 days, because the estimated time between a major hurricane and sort of help reaching folks is about 3 days, worst case scenario. So you're going to want food, water, for 3 days for all of your family group and your pets. And then you're going to want some basic sort of tools, including, matches or a lighter, first aid kit, and then a battery powered radio and batteries. And that's really, as well as a flashlight. Those are really the most essential items, but you can sort of mix and match and get more creative, become more of a prepper if you want to. That's totally up to you, but that's like our basic things that we sort of advise. And then in terms of COVID, when we're thinking about either of these sort of options, your go bag or your home kit, you're gonna want to include some basic COVID protections, including masks or face coverings, hand sanitizer, and disinfectants. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about an evacuation plan. So let's go one more. Yep, so this is just saying that basically if we issue a mandatory evacuation as a city, there may be some concerns over COVID precautions, but the immediate threat to life from a major hurricane is definitely much more severe than the threat of a potential virus exposure. So if we issue a mandatory evacuation, it is in your best interest to evacuate. And if you choose not to, if you choose to shelter at home, the thing to keep in mind is that, again, you may be on your own for, an extended period of time, 3 days or more. Hopefully not more, but just keep that in mind. We rarely do issue a mandatory evacuation. When we do, it's quite serious. And then if we go to the next page. Okay, so this is just showing a little bit of our evacuation plans. So basically, if you choose to evacuate, well, this really applies. So there are situations where you might not evacuate. So there's voluntary evacuations, and then there's mandatory evacuations. In the case of a voluntary evacuation, we will not activate our city-assisted evacuation plan, and we will not engage what is being depicted here, which is contraflow. In the case of a mandatory evacuation, the city-assisted evacuation plan will be engaged, and we will start contraflow at 30 hours before the storm hits the Gulf. So basically what contraflow is when all of the highways that are going in and out of New Orleans turn completely outwards. So the inbound lanes also reverse. And at about 30 hours before hurricane force winds hit the coastline, everyone will be going out of the city. So there will be no incoming traffic. And this is just showing, you know, the different major routes of contraflow out of the city. So you have your options if you want to go east, west, or north. If we go to the next slide. Okay, so city-assisted evacuation. I sort of mentioned this without explaining it. Basically, in the case of a mandatory evacuation, the city expects that about 90% of New Orleanians are going to be able to evacuate on their own, whether that's through friends, family, or their own individual means. But that leaves about 35,000 to 40,000 folks who are going to need city assistance getting out of New Orleans. So in the case that we engage mandatory evacuation, this plan is going to be activated. And basically what it consists of is the city encourages residents to come to a centralized location, which is the Smoothie King Center, which is right next to the Superdome. And through that location, we send folks out to a variety of shelters across the state and in neighboring states. So we're just helping people get out of the city. And if we go to the next slide, we can get a little bit more specific. So through this plan, there are 17 designated pickup locations. So if you are someone who needs help getting out of the city, then there are 17 locations where you can go specifically to get picked up in the case that an evacuation has been ordered. And RTA buses will come to those locations periodically in the 72 hours leading up to a storm. In addition to that, there are several other options. So RTA will also run on a Saturday schedule, regardless of the date of the storm. And all bus routes ending in Duncan Plaza will make a final stop at the Smoothie King Center. So if you're not near one of these 17 evacuation sites, you will be able to just take a regular bus, take it to Duncan Plaza, and they will drop you off at the city-assisted evacuation site. In addition, evacuees can be dropped off or walk up to the Smoothie King Center from a variety of different locations around downtown, and then obviously use Uber, Lyft, or just hitch a ride. And then the last thing to keep in mind is, yep, you can go to that slide, the special needs registry. So in the case that you are unable to take a bus or take a car or get a lift to the Smoothie King Center, you can get picked up by EMS through registration in the special needs registry. So if you have particular medical or mobility needs, and they vary, then you can register for the special needs registry ahead of time by calling 311, and we will come and get you in the case of a mandatory evacuation and help you get to the Smoothie King Center and then off to a shelter that can sort of suit your needs. So there are a variety of people who this might apply to. If you have, you know, anything from sort of mobility needs in terms of just issues walking, or if you have particular sort of hearing needs, if you're on dialysis, if you use a service animal, there are so many different reasons why you might need assistance getting to Smoothie King, and we can help you. So I recommend signing up for the special needs registry by calling 311 if that applies to you. So we go to the next page. just very, very quickly, in the case of an evacuation, if you're using the city assisted evacuation plan, which again is only if you don't have another way out of the city, you're going to bring a small bag of personal items, any medical equipment you need, and any pets you may have. We take any and all pets, and they will either be with you if they're small, or at a shelter right next to your shelter if they're super big, like horses, for example, which happens apparently. So don't be afraid to walk up to the Smoothie King with any pets you may have, and then also just make sure you bring any essential supplies. And then if we go to the next page, this is just our timeline. So just so y'all are aware, thankfully we can sort of predict the path of a hurricane, not perfectly, but a little bit, like to the point necessary ahead of time. So about 72 hours out, so 3 days in advance, the mayor will issue a mandatory evacuation plan, right? And at about 54 hours, the Smoothie King Center will open for registration, and we'll start picking people up at our evacuation spots. And then if you give us like 14 more hours, no, even more, 24 more hours, we will be picking up people for a whole 24 hours. But at, again, that 30 mark, when contraflow begins, we're going to stop picking people up, because at that point, we're going to try to get as many people out and away from Smoothie King and to regional shelters as possible. So all of our buses will be devoted to that at that point. At hour 12, air travel, will be grounded. And then finally, hour 0 is when tropical storm winds reach the coast. So if this stresses you out, don't worry. Even when contraflow begins and the evacuation inside the city limits ends, we will still be having shelters throughout the city. And the primary shelter will be at the convention center. So our emergency operations will move from the Smoothie King Center to the convention center. I will be there amongst a load of other emergency managers. So you will be in good company if you do not make it out in time, but you still want to go somewhere to shelter. But this is just our hard and fast timeline for the evacuation itself. So if we go to the next slide. This is just a plug for our NOLA Ready Volunteer Corps. So one of the amazing things that I get to do on this side is actually help manage our volunteer corps. We have an amazing volunteer coordinator who has been working at vaccination sites nonstop since the start of January. But in terms of storms, our volunteer corps also helps with the city assisted evacuation. So if you want to volunteer during an evacuation, keep in mind you will not be asked to stay. You will also be released at hour 30 when contraflow begins, and you will just be working between the hours that the evacuation actually begins and the end at contraflow. So you'll have plenty of time to get out of the city. There are lots of options if you're volunteering with us during city assisted evacuation. You may be asked to help with registration. You may be asked to help with, mobility and accessibility needs. You may be asked to just hang out with folks as they wait to be evacuated. You may help with pets. There's a variety of things, and we really have a huge need because, as you can imagine, some of our public safety forces are going to be engaged otherwise. So our police and fire, while they're assisting with the evacuation, also have a million other things to do in the case of a major storm. So we really rely on our volunteers. And if you're interested in volunteering, you can sign up at ready.nola.gov/volunteer. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is really for businesses, but in the case that you have a business, you may be eligible for tiered reentry. So basically what this means is after a major storm, we do not allow everyone back into the city all at once in the case of a major flooding event or major damages, just to make sure that it's safe before everyone comes back in. So there's tiered reentry, which basically means there are 3 tiers of businesses who are allowed to enter before general population. And the first, of course, is emergency assistance. So businesses and agencies that provide critical response to or critical support to response efforts. So this might include, hospitals, damage assessment teams, things like that. Tier 2 is recovery support more generally. This includes insurance companies, grocery stores, pharmacies. And then finally, tier 3 is repopulation support. So examples include grocery stores, restaurants, things like that, your everyday citizen might need if they come back. So if we go to the next page, that is about it. So really, I hope what you take away from this is that you are very much empowered to be prepared in the case of a major disaster. There are steps that you can take. As someone who has just recently moved to New Orleans, I've only been here for the year of 2021, so it's been about 5 months. I am taking the same steps with you. So I'm starting from scratch. I've got my go bag. I'm working on my home kit. I've signed up for all of the alerts, although I probably would be ostracized at work if I hadn't already. But yeah, there are a ton of things you can do. And I know that I sort of threw information at you guys, but if you want a broader look, or if you have any questions about any of this, you can go to ready.nola.gov. And then if you have sort of specific questions that our website can't answer, you can email ready@nola.gov. And we will happily answer any of your questions. I think that sort of wraps it up for me. I can throw it back over to you guys if you want to talk about your next education series. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maddie. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to come out to speak to homeowners and residents, especially new homeowners and residents in the lower ninth ward. Like, that was really our target audience for this presentation. Due to technical difficulties, we couldn't air this online. But I think also because of technical difficulties, we have something to our advantage, and I really want to take advantage of it. So I noticed that I have a couple of staff members on board and some local residents who have been here a long time. So I think it'll be the perfect opportunity to invite some of those people to speak and to share some tips from their experience, especially like Miss Cynthia, and I see Jim on the call, just like any, things that we can share from our personal experience that could help someone who has never experienced this. This will be recorded. We are taking it and going to place it on Facebook or YouTube after we're done with this presentation. So you guys, when you share your tip, keep in mind, just introduce yourself, because we want to know our neighbors, but also just share any tips that you have, especially for Maddie, since she's new to the area as well. And just things that we've just learned just along the way. So if you guys can unmute, we'll try this. And either you can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat box. But I would really love to hear from Miss Cynthia and Jim. And I think I see Travis in the group as well. So if you guys can introduce yourselves, that would be wonderful.
Hi, this is Cynthia. I'm with the case manager for the Lower Ninth Ward Homeownership Association. Last hurricane season, I did not evacuate. I stayed home. And it really depends on how severe I think the hurricane will be. Now with Katrina, I did evacuate prior to, which I'm glad I did. But I would think that I would advise residents to pay close attention to the warnings that are given. And if you decide to stay home, make sure you have everything that you need. Because the one that we had with Hurricane Zeta, I was without electricity for 6 days, which I had not anticipated.
Yeah.
But that was very trying. But I did have everything else. The only thing I did have to do, the weather changed on us because it became cool, quite cool. And
Mhm.
so I did evacuate, and I went and I stayed by my daughter for a couple of days just to be able to get out of the house. Was not, had it not been for that, I wouldn't have mind staying in. And all my neighbors were here too. They did not evacuate. But I would suggest though, if you get a warning and it's mandated, please evacuate. It is too serious of a matter to just say, oh, well, I'll stay home and ride it out. I don't think any of us should take that chance, especially after Katrina.
Wow, Miss Cynthia, like, thank you for sharing that. You made me remember that was like around Halloween, and Sarah was out of power for a long period of time. I'm out in the East, and so my power just kind of like blanked off and on a couple of times, but I just know so many people were out of power for days and
Yep.
using their cars to charge their cell phone, which comes with their own dangers. But just like even the stores were out of power. So just like, oh goodness, what can I eat out of the freezer to save my food? Wow. So who else is on? Oh, I see Jim. Hey Jim, you want to
How you
share?
doing, Danielle?
Good.
I'd just like to tell some people some things that just happened to me in the last 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
Check your homeowner's policy like tomorrow, because you can have either 2% or 5% deductible. 5% is a lot more than you think it is. So, an unnamed insurer will only allow you to change your deductible at your anniversary date. So read your policy and see what it is. And when I heard that, between other words I won't repeat for Ms. Deve, I immediately changed coverages.
Mm-hmm.
And they got canceled, and I had to get, there's a video of me jumping up on my steps telling them they weren't damaged. The second thing you need to do is, if you don't have flood insurance, it takes about 45 minutes to get. You have to pay for it, but they cut you off if a storm comes in the Gulf. So if I was doing this, you can go to FEMA online. The system works most of the time, and you can actually do it there. And you may have to pay for it yourself. For some reason, mortgage companies will not take it out if it is not mandated, which in my opinion is kind of self-destructive. But get that done, because if it comes in, that's when you're going to have trouble. And for the 20 minutes it's going to take you, it's worth it. It solves your problems right there.
Mm-hmm.
Where I live, that's where Zeta came over, and I was actually in the eye of the storm. And my siding was coming off my house. I shanghaied my neighbors, got up on a ladder and banged my siding back in during the eye wall. And, I'm trying to make sure that I'm the one that has to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We got video of that. My neighbor just get off there. I said, I need to keep my house. So that's the sort of things, you have to have your plan today.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're going to give you 72 hours to a mandatory, but when it comes right down to it, you got to be on top of it and do it early. If you're ready to do it, do it. Don't think about it. Don't worry about it. Do it. Would you agree, Mr. Beck?
Yeah.
On a less serious note, I would say the thing that surprised us and what caught us was, with all of the stores and the gas stations, everything being out, like the basics of like coffee. You don't think about it, but for a lot of people, make sure you have, I know you're laughing at me. I'm just telling you, after Zeta, like, we had no power for almost a week. And a week is a long time to go without coffee, and all of the gas stations and everybody was out driving around. Nobody could get any. And it was a simple thing. Like, we just needed some charcoal because we could boil water. We could do all of that without power. But so the coffee situation made me think, one of the things to have in your home kit is charcoal, or something that you can use to make food, heat up the stuff, even if you don't have power for an extended period of time, because canned food, you can only stomach that for a day or two, and then you got to move on.
Yeah.
What was the other thing? I'm sure there were others, but for whatever reason, coffee with charcoal stands out to me.
Absolutely.
Who else do we have on? We have some phone numbers, and I don't recognize. I recognize one of them, but I don't recognize the others. So at any point, if you guys want to unmute and share your input, we will love it. Again, just think of someone who's a first-time homeowner in the Lower Ninth Ward, or just a new resident to the Lower Ninth Ward, and share what you know. Let me see. I think the phone number is 450-2607. Do you want to share anything? Yep. And actually, I don't see anything, but I do see a hand from Sarah's unmuting. Hold on.
No, they have to unmute themselves.
Okay.
But I'm asking them to unmute.
Sweet. So, there you go.
While they're unmuting, we do have an evacu spot down here, and it's in front of Sanchez Center. So all of what Maddie was talking about, if somebody is needing help evacuating, our evacu spot is in front of Sanchez Center.
Okay. And you may proceed. You're unmuted. 210-6077, you're unmuted.
Okay. Hi, my name is Travis Banks, and I'm with Gravel Road Builders and Construction Services. I'm also a local native to New Orleans in the Ninth Ward. I would give one major tip is to buy like a portable generator, because you have to charge your phones and TVs to keep up what's going on, and entertainment during the times when the electric is out, power is out. I would also recommend filling up with gas in case you have to get out of Dodge. Plus, if you have to charge your phone and devices.
Wow. Okay, y'all. So you're gonna laugh at me, but I just realized 210-6077 was my brother, and that's why Sarah laughed at me, because I think I'm slowly losing it. But yeah, that was actually my brother, and I just noticed that. But I'm just surprised he didn't mention anything about boarding up, because I can remember like growing up, and we grew up on the Holy Cross side of the Lower Ninth Ward, and my dad would literally take almost a full day to board everything up with plywood. And I'm just wondering, like, in the, because we're in the middle of the pandemic, like how difficult it'll be to get access to that. And because right now you go to Home Depot, you can't find everything that you want. Same at Lowe's, you can't find everything that you want. So I don't know what that's gonna look like. And then I have a question, Maddie. What about I know Sarah mentioned that our stop in the Lower Ninth Ward is at the Sanchez Center on Caffin Avenue, and that's one stop for the entire Lower Nine. And then I noticed that there's one stop for the entire New Orleans East. Like, the East is huge. Are there any plans to add more stops? Like, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm just wondering what that's gonna look like with just one stop in two nice sized communities, or people with limited access to transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're not the only one who has noticed that. So that plan has not been revisited for about 10 years. And we are in I know. We are in the process of revisiting it right now. So it's being completely redrafted. Part of the new plan includes a variety of sort of different options. So we haven't decided, which is why it hasn't been formally changed yet. There's some internal debate about adding more evacu spots or just shifting to an entirely new system where the buses run their normal routes and including all those normal routes. But as you may know, there aren't enough buses going to New Orleans East in the first place. So we are thinking about this, and that's part of why I say, you know, you can go to an evacuation spot or you can take your normal bus route. We'll be running Saturday bus routes and use that to get to Duncan Plaza, which is sort of our centralized bus location right now. And any buses that stop at Duncan Plaza are going to drop off for city assisted evacuation. So if you take any bus route, you'll be able to transfer to a bus that stops at Duncan Plaza if it doesn't already. And then you can use that to get to the Smoothie King Center. So the difference is the evacuation spots are direct lines to the Smoothie King Center, and otherwise you're going to have to navigate your normal bus route to Duncan Plaza. But we hear you. We are aware that this is not good. This is an outdated plan. And we're changing it. We're in the process of changing it. So just hear me on that. I think that the plan is to have the updated plan in place and running for the 2022 season. But as you can imagine, a lot of our time in the past year and a half has been spent on COVID response. So we're still ready for a hurricane, but our attempts to sort of change the plan have been a little bit dampered by COVID and sort of focusing on vaccinations. But thank you for pointing that out, because I love when people do that, because I can get back to the rest of our team and say, here's another community member who's saying that this needs to be changed. I love that.
Yeah, I think it's something that I'm going to talk with, you know, the staff at the Homeownership Association and work with the other neighborhood associations so that we can create some noise around this. And I'm saying this, one, as a resident of the community, but also as someone who lost, I lost my only sister in Hurricane Katrina. So when it comes to situations like this, like, I know the pandemic is really serious, and we just experienced a little piece of what it's like to have a hurricane in the middle of the pandemic. And the last thing I would want is to see more lives lost in a hurricane because we didn't have the time to make a plan. It kind of scares me a little bit, and it just makes me think about what you said, to like check on your neighbors before you leave. Just seeing, and that's the spirit of what the Lower Ninth Ward is, right? Like, we know how to check on our neighbors. We know who our neighbors are, but we, you know, checking in and make sure that they have a way now to Duncan Plaza, because they don't have a lot of buses running in the Lower Ninth Ward. And those that run, I mean, there's such a huge time between one bus and the next bus. It's certainly going to be frustrating for those who are left without transportation in L9. So I'm really like afraid for everyone down there. And I guess my personal experience with the hurricanes is, one, I would say, in addition to important documents, to pack your photos. They cannot be replaced. Like, please grab your photos. Like, I lost all of my kids' baby photos. I lost all of my high school stuff. Just like anything that means anything to you, just put it in something and have it ready to go. I know it seems like you're going to constantly be living in a state of being packed, but that's what it's like to live surrounded by water. And then to have somewhat of like a backup plan. So even though your plan may be to, oh, I'm going to head to Memphis if a hurricane hits. Well, if the hurricane is on track to hit Memphis after New Orleans, it's probably not a good idea to go that way. So just have like a backup plan is a lesson that I learned in the middle of evacuating for Hurricane Katrina. So that's my tip. Does anyone else have anything else to share? Jim?
When she said that, what flashed through my mind is, one of the things that might be a good idea is to pay attention to the power and energy suppliers as to whether one should shut one's power off if you're leaving. And that's always been a bit of a debate. You know, the good news is, if something happened, the house catch on fire. The other good news is that when the power comes back on, it's going to kick off immediately because everybody's got their compressor going. It just makes it worse. And if you can shut it off before you leave, of course, the bad news, your house is going to be hot. But when everything gets kicked back on, it's not the problem. Like, it'll kick and you okay, good. And it's always at 2 a.m. and the lights go on, you jump up, oh my God, thank you. And then 5 minutes later, you're out of power again.
Yeah.
And that's just something you learn over time. Now, I don't
Mhm.
recommend people play with their gas lines because that's dangerous. But just to have the idea in your mind that when you come back, God only knows what happened. And don't put yourself in a position where you go into your house and you suddenly realize it's had a little fire
Yeah.
and it wasn't in your fireplace.
Mm.
Just something, for people who just have never experienced this before. The infrastructure issues are huge, and they're
Mhm.
beyond, as Gaynell can tell you, beyond belief.
Yeah.
And, if something bad happens, as a practicing psychologist, I can tell you, you're not going to come back in a good frame of mind, and you're going to be like,
Mhm.
and you just have to have that reminder that you're going to have to function in an environment that ain't functioning.
Mhm.
And that's it. But for new people, that's the one thing they don't know is,
Mhm.
people say, oh, we're having a hurricane. Did it get those here? And if you've never experienced it, you don't understand just how large the magnitude is. As the lady was saying, you got to drive a car across town to get a cup of coffee.
Mhm.
That underlies the fact that you don't have the infrastructure is gone.
Mhm.
No,
Yeah.
nobody can change that.
Yeah.
How hard you work, you can't change it.
Yep. Okay. Travis, do you have another question? I see your hands is up. Or you have more information to share?
I just don't
Nope.
think we ever put his hand down.
Okay.
I have one more thing I wanted to say specifically for this group. Even though I'm a newcomer, one of the things that I really enjoyed coming to New Orleans is actually in the L9 is Lower 9 Fruit Park. So if you go out there, there's a wetland platform which goes over the local levee, and you can sort of see how close you are to water on both sides. Yeah, it's amazing. But you can also get a little bit of a look at the levee system and sort of appreciate the natural barriers that come from the wetlands. So if you look over, I think it's to the west on that particular platform, you can see some of the actual sort of, they're not mangroves, but the forest that makes up the swamp here and creates sort of a natural barrier. And then you've also got your local levee and your federal levee, which as someone, I'm from Houston and we have farms that we don't have the levee system that y'all have, and we aren't really on the water like y'all are. That's super amazing that I haven't seen anywhere else in the city, but the Lower Ninth Ward is that park where you can sort of take it all in at once. So for anyone who's new in the L9 in particular, I really recommend going to Fruit Park and checking that out and getting sort of a visual on some of the protection, but also the water systems around you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. Like, that's the advantage of living in Lower Ninth Ward. There's water everywhere, so we have access to seafood, but we also have 3 bridges, and right now, some of them are under construction. So at any moment, it's like you may not have a way out of the Lower Ninth Ward if you wait to evacuate, if you wait for a mandatory evacuation. So, and we experienced that, like, we often wonder, like, hey, is this a thing that we work on the bridges near hurricane season? We tear the interstate up near hurricane season, and it just adds a new layer to evacuating, right? So I remember, and Travis, correct me if I'm wrong, because your memory is sharper than mine. I think it took us like 18 hours to get to Baton Rouge for Hurricane Ivan, like 18 hours to get to Baton Rouge. And like Sarah said, you don't have any coffee, and you may or may not have gas once you get to Baton Rouge because their power may be out. So when I say plan, I really mean like plan. And everybody, FYI, everybody's heading to Baton Rouge. Everybody's heading to the North Shore. We're all taking the same route. So Gaynell's little tidbit is learn the back roads. Learn the back roads. Get you a map. Or your Google may not work. So go ahead on and get you a Louisiana map and learn the back roads, learn which ones flood and which ones don't. I won't tell you my secret ones.
I'm gonna tell you,
I have to evacuate my mom. She's on dialysis. So I'm usually out way before the mandatory evacuation. So I'll just tell you guys, like, I'm taking airline, I'm taking the West Bank, Highway 90, to learn the back roads before the storm comes in, before the water comes in, because everybody's on 10, everybody's on 12. You may have run into half the lower 9 on Interstate 10 heading to Houston, because that's what we do. Don't go to Houston. Get off the interstate, head to Alexandria, find alternate routes today. Don't wait until the storm is in the water.
Right. And
Yeah.
learn that Highway 90 on the West Bank connects with Highway 1. You get to Baton Rouge in 3 hours.
Faster.
You know,
Yeah.
And don't trust hotel reservations.
No, I forgot that one. Just because you have a reservation, it does not mean it exists, because Travis and I experienced that twice, where we actually made a reservation, got there, and we checked in and said, oh, we don't have any rooms. Jeff is laughing.
Oh, I
Yep.
believe it. I mean,
Yeah.
I got my 12-year-old to make my reservation for me once, and I was praying that it was going to work. But he's on there. I handed him the credit card, and he was in the back seat. I said, "Here, make the reservation." So he's calling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm James Cowley. He didn't tell me, kid, but they gave him the rest. I thought, oh God.
Yeah.
And we got there at 2 a.m. You know.
Yeah.
Luckily, they have.
It depends. It depends. Like, it depends on the situation, Jim. Like, when we got there, they told us, oh, the rooms are gone. And at that time, what was it? Like, I think we had like my parents who are older and the kids, toddlers, just literally like everybody was losing their minds. You were stuck in the car and there's like no hotel.
Right.
We had to find a backup quickly.
Yes.
So, and yeah.
When my kids were in college, I made them drive the back roads.
Mm-hmm.
And what am I going to do that for? I said, because if something happens, you need to get the hell out of here in a sane way.
Yep.
And he did that once. And then he went and bought a cheap tire that blew up on him, you know. And I was fuming. I told you not to do that. You know, that gas tank's got to be full, you know. The minute you hear that thing is near the Gulf, you hit the Chevron, you know, because you don't know how far, you know, some of these stations just out of town may not be full yet, you know, and there's just nothing you can do, you know. You got to have gas for 300 to 400 miles because you're not going to be able to go 60 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go 20, which means you got about 250 in your tank, you know.
Yeah. And we all can't go to Maddie's hometown. Like, we have to go and take another spot. Maybe, I don't know. Go east.
You know, even when I'm in Florida, I live part of the year in Florida, and the last time they hit there, I had people, when I got to Mississippi and it was 10 o'clock at night, there were people going 50 miles an hour in the left lane, all with Florida plates. And I was getting aggravated, but I realized what they were doing was they had no idea where they were. And they had been, yeah, they did. They were having the same problem we did. It's 10 o'clock at night. They've been driving since 8 o'clock that morning in Miami, and now they're in Gulfport, Mississippi, and they're trying to figure out where they live and where they're going. And it was like, that was probably the end of their ability to figure out what to do next. And that's what you get into, you know? And they're from Florida, no less, which is, you know, they're about as lucky, they've been a little luckier than we have. Mm-hmm. But I've seen the mess that they have, you know? And my son, when he lived down there, I said, I'll take 95. I said, no, you won't. He goes, what do you mean? I said, everybody in Miami is going to be on I-95. You know? Mm-hmm. So we found a back way, as Gaynell said, that actually goes to Tampa the back way. And you got to go. I said, take your friend, get in the car and just go. You know, don't think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what people realize. This is what's going to happen. And you got to be ready to roll in 30 seconds if you have to, you know?
Wow. So I guess we're going to end on that note. There's nothing else that we can really add to this conversation. Like, we gave a lot of great tips and there was a lot of great reminders. Maybe I should start lecturing my husband about keeping the car on half a tank, because he loves to ride it all the way down and then fill up. So yeah, I guess it's my lecture time. This isn't the time of the year to do that. And then get some tires checked on my car. Jim just reminded me to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have anything else to add, but I will just mess with Sarah before we hang up and say, Sarah, look at this. We had another wonderful conversation with our great friends and family in New Orleans. And I am super proud to have this and have all of you guys on. We look forward to this. We look forward to days where we could do these meetings in person and share coffee. I'll make sure that I have some for Sarah. And just, spend time with each other and learn from each other. And just thank you all for coming. And I look forward to sharing this with other people who need it. So good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everybody.